Hello from Up North News. I'm Pat Kreitlow. Let's unwind the news for this past week. Joining me later will be our reporters Jessica Van Egren, Julian Emerson, and Jonathan Sadowski at our respective home bureaus still. We'll talk about the protests against police violence, what kinds of things are being proposed, and reaction to it all. We'll also unwind the stories that we covered on how Wisconsin is losing out due to errors or mismanagement at the Trump administration level on a couple of subjects, things that affect food banks and farmers who are getting far less than they probably should, and things that affect COVID-19 frontline medical workers who still aren't getting the equipment they need, or they're even getting the wrong equipment sent to them, things they can't use on coronavirus patients. On the subject of the pandemic, we have interviews with two of Wisconsin's local leaders who talk about the frustration and confusion that were sprung on their hometowns and the whole state when the Wisconsin Supreme Court tossed out safeguards that were meant to keep the coronavirus from spreading statewide. We'll talk to Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson about how they tried a regional approach to safeguards, since that's what a lot of conservative legislators were pushing for, only to see the effort fall apart just 24 hours later under threat of lawsuit from conservatives. And Wausau's new mayor, Katie Rosenberg, also shares her experiences at realizing the Supreme Court had decided on a Wild West approach for Wisconsin, and how things could have been less chaotic had there only been leadership at higher levels of government. And finally, we'll show you how a high school in the Fox Valley ended up having a graduation ceremony for the class of 2020 after all, and once you see it, you might never again sit inside a hot, stuffy auditorium or gymnasium for graduation, at least if you have a drive-in theater in the area. So let's start to unwind by hearing from Wausau Mayor Katie Rosenberg, still just a few weeks into the new job and having to help a city navigate both a pandemic and an overwhelming public demonstration against racism and police violence across the country. And goats. We talk about her hopes for goats for the city as well. Now, while there was a huge rally in Wausau this past Saturday, this interview was taped prior to that, so you'll hear her reference the city's first big rally the previous Friday. We begin with a look at her hometown's experience reacting to racism.
From what I have seen on the Twitter machine, Wausau is not immune from the problems of racism, but also is with many other communities in trying to do something about it. Put a statement out there on the record about what your community's values really are. What's the past week been like in Wausau?
Right. So we've had a lot going on. Obviously, we've had similar demonstrations with George Floyd. It was a very peaceful rally last Friday. Everyone gathered in front of the courthouse. So I went down there. Our police chief and deputy police chief went down there, and we basically listened to people. What do you want out of your government? How do you expect to be treated? And it was a really good opportunity for all of us to just kind of get together and talk. And it's actually created some interesting relationships for me now too, because I now have this network of folks who want to participate in the policymaking side. I was able to appoint a couple of folks to one of our diversity committees, so we can actually start to address the policy that our city council needs to bring on.
And this is something that you're no stranger to, in that weird way of being, not just being hated for what you look like or what you are or what your name is, but being hated for what you're not, but other people
Right.
think you are.
Right. Yeah. So my family has this long history of being treated, with hate mail and things because people assume we're Jewish. Rosenberg, is a German name, a Jewish name. So it's one of those things that, as I was growing up, my dad serving on city council and county board and being very outspoken, he got a lot of anti-Semitic letters in the mail. I got a couple of those too, not nearly as many traditional mail as he did, but it happens. I do a lot of muting on Twitter, so it just kind of goes to show you how absurd this all really is. If you can hate somebody for what they are, even if they aren't, it's insane. And hating people for who they are, their backgrounds, where they come from, how they identify, it's not just absurd, it's absurd. I don't know how else to put it. It makes no sense.
No, it really doesn't. It shows us a side that reminds us how much work we have yet to do. Let's switch gears to the other public health issue that's going on right now,
Right.
of course, and that's the coronavirus pandemic and how each level of government should be handling things. And a lot has been said about how the Trump administration has handled or mishandled or ignored the crisis or been in denial or then provided resources. And of course, the governors have had a lot to say and do with or without federal assistance. And then you have the legislatures that may or may not have been active wherever they are. We talked to Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson, who noted this kicking the can aspect of the president saying it's on the governors, and now the legislature here kicking it to the local levels of government. So I'd like to know your own experiences after that Supreme Court decision that got rid of the Safer at Home extension. Did you try to do something on your own, you in the city of Wausau, or join with Marathon County or other counties as Tom Nelson tried in the Fox Valley? What was that like, and where are you at right now?
Yeah, so we all knew that Supreme Court decision was coming. Obviously, we assumed there would also be that 6-day stay to kind of calibrate and figure out what was going on here, but there wasn't. So basically, it was the Wild West. We all had to decide. And you're right when you talk about the levels of government. It does feel like everyone is kind of punted to the next level, and it's too bad because we know that the federal government has this great array of expertise in science and epidemiology, and it's been great to hear from the CDC, but we really need the policymakers to take a stance on this. How concerned should we be? I respect the science. I want to make sure that I'm taking it seriously, but also not endangering my communities in any way, economy, all of that. It's a concern all around. So then when it comes down to the state, we really needed some guidance on how to approach this. And what we got was this kind of overturn saying it's not lawful, so that not that. And people interpreted that as the pandemic is over. And we know that's not true. And we also ended up here, especially with some concern over what is the authority of our local health department, because some of that Supreme Court decision kind of pointed to maybe local county health departments don't have that authority. And then we saw various health departments, city and county, declaring their own safer at homes, only to overturn those later because they were also in fear of those lawsuits. So not only do we have a pandemic, we have unclear guidance, we're now afraid of getting sued. So it really felt like the Wild West. It still continues to. I did what I could. I don't have the authority to say, all right, Wausau's under Safer at Home. We don't have a local health department, a city health department that was created before 1992 or whatever the state statute says. So I said, well, we're going to continue protecting our employees and anybody that visits City Hall. So City Hall's still closed. We still are encouraging people to follow those recommendations of wearing a mask, washing your hands, all of that, social distancing. But it really feels like it's not enough. And obviously I'm staring out the window, you see people doing whatever they want, and that's their freedom to do that. But it really created a problem. And so now we are charged with understanding that we're still operating in a pandemic, but we have decisions to make. Do we open our swimming pools? Do we let people play on these playgrounds that are unsanitized? What do we do here? And it's become politicized instead of being able to trust the science. People are questioning it all the time. So we're in this strange scenario where we might not have schools opening in the fall, but people want us to open our swimming pools. And it's really tough.
What kinds of things encourage you from what you're seeing around your community these days?
Right. So we actually had some of the local business owners came to us and they said, we our restaurants are small. We can't social distance in these restaurants. We want people to feel comfortable eating with us, and pickup is great and everything, but where's all the money coming from? We know that some of that comes from the alcohol sales and all of that. So what do we do? How can we encourage people to come downtown and eat and feel safe? So we came up with a couple of ideas. So one of the things we're doing is on Wednesday nights, we usually, in the summer, we have a concert on the square, brings thousands of people down. Obviously, that's all canceled because we can't have people gathering like that. But we still have those Wednesday nights where people want to do something. So we're working with one of the downtown associations to close off the streets so people can expand their restaurants into the street. They can be served. We're working to put more picnic tables on our 400 block so that people can, picnic and enjoy the weather and everything like that, but be socially distant. We have a lot of creativity coming from some of our artist communities. They're doing their own murals, their chalk art, and then even the musicians are working to put on these kind of live concerts that they can live stream and people can participate in online, it's been really fun. It's not my favorite way to gather, but I'm glad that we're finding these ways to work together.
Last question that I have to ask you, because it's probably been asked a few times
Oh boy.
and probably will continue to be. Katie, what's with the goats?
Oh my gosh, I am so excited about these goats. So obviously, I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Madison. I really enjoy Madison's mayor. She's fabulous. She was one of the first people to reach out to me. So when I saw that they figured out how to get goats to deal with their invasive species, I was all on board. And it was like perfect timing because I had just gone on a tour of one of our parks with our park director at Barker Stewart Island. And they were talking about all of the invasive species that they need to get rid of. And, they were talking about using machines and maybe even chemicals. And I was like, can we not use chemicals? We're right by the river. So then when I saw these goats, I was like, oh man, we need to bring the goats to Wausau. We need them to take care of this island and all of the invasives. And we, kill two birds with one stone with some goats.
So this is happening now?
So they're looking into it. I think I caused a little bit of a stir with this because now she's being contacted by everyone who's excited about these goats. We're looking into it, and I'm going to be pushing it.
Wausau Mayor Katie Rosenberg, thanks for joining us on Up North News.
Thank you very much for having me.
Next, we hear from Tom Nelson, the Outagamie County executive, is a former state assembly representative as well. So he's very familiar with how the various levels of government should be working with one another rather than competing with or undermining each other. And like Katie Rosenberg, he references how everyone was caught off guard when the state Supreme Court not only tossed out Governor Evers' pandemic safeguards, but also rejected the Republicans' request for a 6-day transition period. He says, however, this is still a crisis of the GOP's own making. Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson, thank you for joining us on Up North News. Pleasure to have you here.
Good to be on. First time. Hopefully one of many.
We hope so too. Thank you very much. You wrote about the COVID-19 pandemic and the role of a county executive as opposed to the role of state government and whether certain rules work best at the local level or the state level. Now, we don't have to rehash everything the state Supreme Court did, but I want to start with, in the wake of that decision and lacking any state replacement from the Republican side, where did that put you when that decision came down, and then what happened?
Well, I think it put us in a really bad spot, an untenable position that should not have happened in the first place. We did have conversations specifically with our corporation council. I did have a couple of talks with neighboring county executives and also the new mayor in Appleton about, well, what if? What if this comes to pass? And the collective conventional wisdom is that if anything comes to pass, that we would have to get involved in a substantive role in place of what the state was doing, which we didn't expect, because the entire purpose of the lawsuit was that they would have, the legislature would have a seat at the table in helping craft the rules. But the worst case scenario is that we would at least have 6 days, whether it was in partnership with the state or if it would be a different arrangement. So we were all planning on that when this happened, and we were asking around, okay, so does that mean we have a waiting period? What does that mean exactly? It became very clear, very apparent that this was going to be the wild, wild west. Brown County was the first county to go it alone, so to speak, at least up here in Northeast Wisconsin. They had and they have a very dangerous hotspot at one of the meatpacking plants. Last I checked, they had well over 2,000 cases. So my good friend Troy Streckenbach said, we need to act right now. And he got an order an order up in place by 8 o'clock. That was less than 3 hours after the Supreme Court decision. I felt a responsibility in 2 ways. Number one, Brown County, Outagamie County, we're neighbors, and we pair a lot on different projects, whether it's infrastructure, roads, workforce development, whatever it might be. And I said right then and there, I'm not going to let my friend go alone on this. We're going to give him some support. By noon the next day, we had put together a 3-county consortium, including in total 5 different public health jurisdictions. We did that in less than 24 hours. We learned a couple of things. Number one, the one level of government that seems to have their stuff together to be responsive is local government. Number two, when push comes to shove, and we've got a very big problem staring us down, and here in Northeast Wisconsin, we can come together as neighbors, united, doing the right thing, taking on a pretty tough responsibility. It's number two. But third, and most important, and this is why I wrote that op-ed, it is very, very difficult to do this, to take on COVID, to address a global pandemic at a local level through local policy. It makes it incredibly difficult because while we were able to get this order in place within 24 hours, it fell apart in 24 hours, and for a number of reasons. We need to go back to why and to how we got into this predicament, and that's because of the GOP legislature. They attacked a law that has been around for over 100 years, and the law is grounded in a framework of law that includes local home rule that's been around for well over 100 years in the late 19th century. Why, after all this time, does a legislature think that they need to take this away? Or, as they contended, to at least share and partake in the rulemaking process? Number one, and number two, they got their way. Why haven't they done anything?
Well, and that's a fair question, and it begs this point that in the absence of a statewide plan from a major political party, from one side of the aisle, from the side that's governing the legislative branch, people are asking why in this country especially has management of a pandemic that has killed over 100,000 people become political, become partisan, become so divisive. As a local county executive who runs in a nonpartisan election, what's your view on how we got to this point?
It's completely dysfunctional. And I think there is a tendency to look at dysfunction at the state level, definitely at the federal level, as a pox in both houses. This is just both parties, they're attacking each other, they're trying to play political games. If you really drill into this and you look at the facts, this is not a pox on both houses. This is one particular party, the GOP legislature, that attacked a law that had an established precedent going back many, many years. We need to have leadership from the White House. That's not happening. The president is relying on states to do the job that he should be doing, just like the state legislature is relying on local government or kicking this down to local government to solve a problem that they should do.
All right, let's unwind the news here with the Up North News reporters, Jessica Van Egren, Jonathan Sadowski, Julian Emerson. Turning our attention to the week's headlines, Jess, we'll start with you because it was a day versus night situation, and you saw what was happening by day in Madison with peaceful protests, but then had to report on what happened during the night as well. And this happened in many places. It happened in many cities. And what I want to focus on is that a lot of people are reminding us not to lose sight of the big picture. Yes, there was rioting, there was violence, there was police violence as well, but this really is all about police reform, and people are still talking about that, aren't they?
They are. The platform that's been circulating in Madison and across the country actually has its roots in the Black Lives Matter movement and 100 other organizations. There's three essential components. It's defund the police, free them all, which means let most of the inmates out, especially now given COVID-19, and that to work towards more community policing. And it seems like the defunding movement is gaining a little bit of speed. I know that there's a request that's been made in the city of Milwaukee for them to funnel more of their funds that would traditionally go towards police budgets to other organizations that address the systemic racism and disparities in the minority communities. So, you know, theoretically, maybe they would take $50 million that used to go to the police budget and funnel that towards like public health agencies or other social services agendas. But Governor Tony Evers, while he's calling for reform, said that defunding police is, I guess, too drastic of a step.
Well, it's a loaded term. It's a political term. And much like people say, you know, abolish ICE, defund the police is a very heartfelt sentiment by some people. And there's also this move just to reform use of force, Jess, which is what Governor Evers has brought up a couple of times today, asking for Voss and the others to take up a particular bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a bill that was brought up late last session by Democrats, and it, I mean, still doesn't have any Republican sponsors, but yeah, it would put more of the focus on, you know, changing the use of force. Honestly, I don't really see it going anywhere.
Because it feeds into a political narrative in an election year, unfortunately. And as if we need any reminders further of how much work has yet to be done. Not too far from you, Jess, in Monona, the police department had a Karen incident. We won't get into the whole thing. You can read about it on our website, but where somebody called about somebody in their house. Let's switch gears while we talk about politics, Julian, over to the Wisconsin Elections Commission, which has a 3-3 split. So it's not like partisan power is at stake here, but somebody's got to control the gavel. And this time around, it's passing in this election year from the Republicans to Democrats. So what's that about?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if that really changes anything in terms of how divided they have been. In recent months in particular, there have been more 3-3 votes than I can count, split along the equal 3 Democrats and 3 Republican party lines on many, many issues. I think a lot of people were pleasantly surprised and maybe heartened a little bit when it came to their vote last week. They found some traction and were able to approve several votes related to mail-in ballots and to mail absentee ballots to most eligible voters in the state. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a little less bickering. I'm hoping that there can be that they can find room to do the work that they're supposed to be doing.
But there's also room for them to mess this all up again in the coming week when they vote or debate what the actual mailer will look like to send out those absentee ballot applications. So despite that unanimous vote, this could still all fall apart in the coming week, couldn't it?
Correct. The real vote is going to be this next week and it all is going to be about the wording of the letter and the design of the ballot. And that maybe in reality, they will come to a decision and really send all those absentee ballots out, or maybe it'll be a stalemate and this was really a ruse to not send those out by Republicans, some of whom have said they don't want these absentee ballots to go out because they think that it favors Democrats.
Sure. And this all, of course, is in an election year where there will be many candidates, many races across, 115 legislative races, congressional races. And so if you go over to UpNorthNewsWI.com, we have an article that highlights some of the races we'll be watching most. There are, by my count here, at least 3 races with 7 candidates in the primary. Let's switch gears now over to the pandemic. And Jess, you've been following the Department of Health Services with their briefings. The dashboard for a time had 5 of 6 indicators green. We've regressed a bit to 4 of 6 indicators. And even though there's been, a percentage that hasn't been skyrocketing of positive tests. The folks at the briefing on Thursday, Ryan Westergaard and Andrea Palm, made it clear we're not out of the woods yet on this, are we?
No, I think the goal of the state and public health officials is to really utilize the testing capacity and the amount of tests that the state now has. The goal, and one that they've been able to meet, is to test between 12,000 and 13,000 people a day, which they have been doing. And the ultimate goal of this is they want to be able to drop the number of positive tests, or at least have a handle and the capacity to respond quickly to surges by the time flu season starts.
Jonathan, there's also essential workers that still have to do their job, and you've been hearing from people who note that not the entire population can self-quarantine, and as a result, there's still a lot of risks in a lot of jobs out there.
Correct, and this was something that was once again brought to light by Voces de la Frontera. They had a press conference yesterday with the family of a man named Michael Jackson. He worked at Briggs & Stratton in Wauwatosa, and he he collapsed on the job, and he ended up passing away due to COVID-19. And they had his family, they had a union rep speak, and basically he was afraid to call into work. Apparently they don't get sick days there, and he felt pressured to go in. And he and a few other workers, actually, they were actively fighting for sick days and more transparency from the company, but they weren't able to really get anywhere, and they ended up being pressured into coming back to work, according to his family and one coworker and a union rep.
Yeah, so there are going to be these workplace issues, and not to mention the ongoing government issues. And Julian, you had a story earlier about members of the Wisconsin congressional delegation saying in so many words to the Trump administration, stop screwing up our orders of medical supplies, things that aren't arriving or the wrong things are arriving. What was that about?
Yes, it was. There were 4 Democratic congressional delegate members who wrote a letter to the president and his administration, basically saying, you have promised these supplies repeatedly. We have made a request. Governor Evers has made the request. He spelled it out, and we are getting far too few of them. And of some of those that they were getting, they were damaged. So some of the test kit materials, some of the swabs that they did receive, they didn't receive all they were supposed to, and some that they did receive, they couldn't use to do testing. So that continues to be a problem. It's been a problem throughout this pandemic since it really surfaced in March, and there's been a lot of talk. I think that people thought it had been fixed, but it apparently has not.
And alluding to something Jess mentioned earlier, these things have to get fixed before the next flu season, or it's going to just exacerbate the conditions there. But Julian, there was another area where the Trump administration is being accused of mismanagement this past week, and that was in a program that's supposed to help both farmers and food banks. And it appears, if that's the case, Wisconsin's getting chipped out of tens of millions of dollars in federal assistance.
Yes, again, this was the USDA who had approved funding to get, basically to pay farmers. They were giving the funding to food banks. The food banks would in turn pay farmers and processors for food, because the supply chain has been broken during the pandemic. Wisconsin, according to the normal way the money is distributed, was supposed to get $44 million of that funding thus far. So far, they have received only $9 million. So food banks don't have the funding to pay the farmers and the processors that they were promised they were going to receive.
And as if Wisconsin farmers didn't have enough trouble already, you also had the news this week that China was putting at least a pause on purchasing American farm goods, even after President Trump had talked up a deal that he said he had reached with the Chinese government back in January that would greatly increase purchases of, for example, Wisconsin soybeans. But that has been put on pause because of tensions over how to administer the government in Hong Kong. So Wisconsin farmers are caught up in this international squeeze, and China in the meantime has started buying more soybeans from Brazil. Wisconsin farmers may or may not get back into the market. So it's going to be a long summer for Wisconsin agriculture. It's going to be a long summer as well, Jonathan, for young people across Wisconsin, given the pandemic. It's probably ruined some of their summer jobs. It certainly ruined a lot of their spring sports and classes. But last weekend, you were dealing with some young folks who were not letting a pandemic get in the way of their graduation. It's a video feature that we're putting up. And tell us the genesis of that and what you saw.
Right, so a little bit ago, we had one of our freelance writers do a story about a few high schools that were considering going to drive-in movie theaters for the graduations, keeping them on the same date despite coronavirus, but doing it in a way where people can stay distant while still, to some degree, getting all the normal things with the graduation. So I spent the weekend in Freedom, which is a small town outside of Appleton, where they have one of 8 remaining drive-in movie theaters in Wisconsin. It's called Fields of Scenes. And what Fields of Scenes did is they let Freedom High School, and they're actually allowing a couple other schools to do it as well. What Freedom did is they filmed a few clips of their students walking across the stage a few weeks in advance. They did the class speeches from the class president, the valedictorian, like normal, and all that was recorded, and they played it at the movie theater on Sunday. So it's a sweet little video feature about how, one school's staff did not let this, take down graduation rather than postpone it when kids might be working already or already away at school or in the military. They just decided to go through with it in a pretty creative way. And it was a really fun thing to be able to go out and do.
And thank you for coming along as we unwind the week's news. We covered so much more and will again this week, and you can follow us all day long on our website, UpNorthNewsWI.com. Don't forget the WI. Same thing for our feeds on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram if you'd rather check out our coverage on your favorite social media feed. We have both a morning and afternoon newsletter, 2 more ways to get the headlines on demand. Sign up over at our website. We have daily updates that you can get through iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher if you prefer your headlines in handy pod form, and a video version on Instagram too. I'm Pat Kreitlow for Up North News. Thank you and have a great week.